My son Marcus had been unusually attentive lately, bringing me my morning coffee and asking about my will with concerning frequency. I thought he was finally showing maturity at 32. Then my doctor called with blood test results that made my hands shake. Someone had been slowly poisoning me with digitalis for months. Marcus thought he was orchestrating the perfect inheritance plan, disguising murder as natural heart failure in a 70-year-old man. Instead, he was about to discover what happens when you underestimate a father who built his fortune by never trusting anyone completely. If you've ever suspected someone close to you had dark intentions, subscribe to see how this attempted murder backfired in the most devastating way possible. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from around the world. Now, the story begins. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came during my routine quarterly checkup with Dr. Patricia Reynolds, when blood work that should have been normal for a healthy 70-year-old man instead revealed abnormalities that suggested either developing heart disease or something more sinister. "Frank, your digitalis levels are elevated to a degree that concerns me," Dr. Reynolds said, as she reviewed my lab results with the careful attention she'd been giving my health for the past 12 years. "Are you taking any medications that contain digitalis compounds?" Digitalis. The name was familiar from my years managing the pharmaceutical division of Henderson Industries, but I hadn't taken any heart medication since my last physical examination had shown excellent cardiovascular health for someone my age. "Patricia, I'm not taking any heart medications," I told her. "The only prescriptions I have are for blood pressure and cholesterol, neither of which should contain digitalis." Dr. Reynolds frowned at my chart, cross-referencing my reported medications with the blood chemistry that indicated significant exposure to compounds I shouldn't have been consuming through normal medical treatment. "Frank, digitalis poisoning can occur through accidental exposure to certain plants or deliberate administration of heart medications," she explained. "The levels in your bloodstream suggest regular exposure over several months." Regular exposure over several months. The timeline coincided with changes in my daily routine that I'd attributed to Marcus's increased attention to my welfare rather than anything that might compromise my health. My 32-year-old son had been unusually solicitous lately, visiting my house 3 times a week instead of his previous monthly appearances, bringing groceries I hadn't requested, and preparing meals with the kind of careful attention that had surprised me after years of minimal contact. "Patricia, what are the symptoms of digitalis poisoning?" I asked. "Fatigue, nausea, visual disturbances, and irregular heartbeat," Dr. Reynolds replied. "In severe cases, digitalis poisoning can cause heart failure that appears natural in elderly patients." Fatigue, nausea, visual disturbances, and irregular heartbeat. I'd been experiencing all of these symptoms for the past 3 months, attributing them to normal aging rather than systematic poisoning that could appear as natural medical decline. "Frank, I need to ask you some direct questions about your living situation," Dr. Reynolds said, her voice taking on the careful tone that medical professionals use when they suspect family abuse or elder manipulation. "Who has access to your food and beverages on a regular basis?" she asked. Marcus had been bringing my morning coffee every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for the past 4 months, always prepared exactly how I liked it, always delivered with the kind of caring attention that had made me believe my son was finally developing mature concern for his aging father's welfare. "My son Marcus visits regularly and sometimes prepares meals or brings coffee," I said, though saying it aloud made me realize how much access Marcus had gained to my food and drink during his recent campaign of filial devotion. "Frank, has anyone in your family been asking questions about your will, your estate planning, or your financial arrangements?" Dr. Reynolds asked. The question hit me like a physical blow as I remembered Marcus's increased interest in my business affairs, his casual inquiries about my estate planning, and his suggestions that I should simplify my financial arrangements by consolidating accounts and updating beneficiary information. "Marcus has been asking about my will," I admitted. "He suggested that I should make sure my estate planning is current and that all my assets are properly documented." Dr. Reynolds nodded with the grim recognition of someone who'd seen elder abuse cases that began with increased family attention and escalated to systematic poisoning designed to accelerate inheritance timelines. "Frank, I'm going to recommend immediate hospitalization for chelation therapy to remove digitalis compounds from your system," she said. "But I'm also going to suggest that you contact law enforcement about potential criminal activity." Criminal activity. The phrase transformed my understanding of Marcus's recent behavior from filial concern to systematic attempted murder disguised as natural medical decline in an elderly parent. Patricia, how long would digitalist poisoning take to cause fatal heart failure? I asked. With the levels we're seeing, probably 2 to 3 months of continued exposure, she replied. You're fortunate that routine blood work detected the poisoning before irreversible cardiac damage occurred. 2 to 3 months. Marcus had been planning my death with the same methodical precision I'd used to build Henderson Industries from a small pharmaceutical distributor into a regional healthcare conglomerate worth $12 million. But Marcus had made one crucial error in his planning. He'd assumed that his increased attention to my welfare would be welcomed without question, and that routine medical monitoring wouldn't detect his systematic poisoning until after it had achieved its intended result. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was that successful businessmen develop instincts for recognizing threats, even when those threats come from family members who've been pretending to care about their welfare while actually planning their murder. That afternoon, I returned to my house with Dr. Reynolds' instructions for chelation therapy and her recommendation to contact Detective Williams from the Elder Abuse Unit about potential criminal prosecution of family members who'd been systematically poisoning me for financial gain. But I also returned with a plan that would teach Marcus about consequences in ways that criminal prosecution couldn't accomplish. Marcus had been systematic and patient in his approach to murdering me, and my response would demonstrate the same methodical precision he'd used to plan what he'd assumed would be the perfect inheritance crime. The first step was documenting exactly how Marcus had been administering digitalis compounds without my knowledge. I installed surveillance cameras in my kitchen, living room, and dining room positioned to record Marcus's food and beverage preparation activities during his regular visits. I also contacted Michael Torres, the private investigator who'd assisted with corporate security issues at Henderson Industries, to conduct comprehensive background research on Marcus's financial situation and recent activities. Mr. Henderson, what specific information are you looking for about your son? Michael asked. I want to know whether Marcus has been researching digitalis poisoning, whether he's been purchasing heart medications or plant materials that contain digitalis compounds, and whether he's been discussing my death or inheritance with anyone, I said. The investigation would either confirm that Marcus had been systematically planning my murder or reveal that my poisoning had occurred through accidental exposure that coincidentally aligned with his increased interest in my estate planning. But my business experience had taught me to distinguish between coincidence and calculated behavior, and Marcus's recent attention to my welfare had been too convenient and too well-timed to be anything other than deliberate preparation for financial benefit from my anticipated death. Over the next week, as chelation therapy gradually reduced the digitalis levels in my bloodstream and restored my normal energy levels, I watched my son continue his routine of bringing coffee and preparing meals while documenting his activities for evidence that would either vindicate or condemn him for attempted murder. Marcus had no idea that his systematic poisoning had been detected, that his activities were being recorded, or that his intended victim was methodically preparing consequences that would match the scope of his betrayal. Some lessons about family loyalty and criminal behavior can only be taught by people who survive attempted murder and choose to respond with the same systematic precision their potential killers used to plan their deaths. Marcus was about to discover whether I was content to report his crimes to law enforcement or whether I preferred to handle family betrayal through more comprehensive methods that would teach him about consequences in ways that extended far beyond criminal prosecution. Michael Torres completed his preliminary investigation into Marcus's activities 3 weeks after I'd hired him to document my son's recent behavior and financial circumstances. The findings were comprehensive, disturbing, and exactly what I'd feared when Dr. Reynolds had suggested that my digitalis poisoning might be deliberate rather than accidental. Mr. Henderson, Marcus has been researching digitalis poisoning for approximately 6 months, Michael reported during our meeting at his downtown office. Internet searches, library book checkouts, and purchases that indicate systematic planning rather than casual curiosity about heart medications. 6 months of research. Marcus had been planning my murder longer than he'd been executing it, studying methods and timelines that would create natural-appearing death in an elderly man while avoiding suspicion from medical professionals or law enforcement. Michael's investigation had uncovered Marcus's online purchase history, revealing orders for foxglove seeds and concentrated digitalis supplements that were marketed as natural heart support, but contained compounds identical to those found in my bloodstream. Marcus has been growing foxglove plants in his backyard since early spring, Michael continued. Neighbors have observed him harvesting leaves and flowers, which he claimed were for natural health preparations. Natural health preparations. Marcus had been cultivating the plants he needed to poison me while maintaining plausible cover stories about herbal medicine interests that would explain his possession of digitalis containing materials. But the investigation had revealed something even more damaging than Marcus's systematic preparation of poisonous compounds. Michael had documented conversations between Marcus and his gambling associates where he'd discussed my anticipated death and his expected inheritance timeline. Mr. Henderson, Marcus owes approximately $80,000 to various creditors, including $45,000 to an illegal gambling operation that expects payment within the next 2 months, Michael explained. $80,000 in gambling debts. Marcus's attempted murder hadn't been motivated by simple greed or impatience with normal inheritance timelines. He'd been facing violent collection methods from people who don't negotiate payment plans or accept family emergency excuses. Michael, has Marcus discussed specific timelines for my death? I asked. According to witnesses at gambling establishments, Marcus has told people that he expects to come into significant monies within the next 60 days due to anticipated family circumstances, Michael said. Significant money within 60 days. Marcus had been providing his creditors with timelines that corresponded exactly to Dr. Reynolds' estimate of how long continued digitalis exposure would take to cause fatal heart failure. The investigation had also documented Marcus's research into inheritance law, probate procedures, and methods for expediting estate settlements to minimize delays between death and asset distribution. Marcus has been consulting with probate attorneys about strategies for quick inheritance processing, Michael reported. He's particularly interested in avoiding lengthy estate investigations that might delay access to liquid assets. Quick inheritance processing. Marcus had been preparing for efficient conversion of my death into cash that could resolve his gambling debts before his creditors escalated to physical violence. Most disturbing was evidence that Marcus had been discussing his poisoning strategy with criminal associates who provided advice about avoiding detection while administering fatal doses of compounds that would appear as natural heart failure in elderly victims. Mr. Henderson, Marcus has been receiving guidance from people experienced in elder abuse and financial exploitation, Michael explained. His approach shows sophistication that suggests professional criminal consultation. Professional criminal consultation. Marcus hadn't been improvising his murder attempt. He'd been working with experienced criminals who'd helped him develop methods for killing me while avoiding the kind of medical or legal scrutiny that would expose his crimes. But Michael's investigation had revealed one crucial flaw in Marcus's planning that would provide the evidence needed to destroy him completely. Marcus had been documenting his poisoning activities through text messages and social media posts that created a digital trail of premeditation and intent. Marcus has been sending text messages to associates describing his progress with what he calls Dad's health management, Michael said, showing me screenshots of communications that detailed Marcus's systematic administration of digitalis compounds. Dad's health management. Marcus had been celebrating his success at poisoning me while creating electronic evidence that would be admissible in criminal court and devastating in civil litigation. The surveillance cameras I'd installed in my home had captured Marcus's food and beverage preparation activities, documenting exactly how he'd been adding digitalis compounds to my morning coffee and prepared meals. The video evidence showed Marcus using an eyedropper to add liquid concentrates to beverages he'd prepared for me, carefully calculating dosages that would maintain steady blood levels without causing immediate symptoms that might prompt medical investigation. Mr. Henderson, the video evidence is comprehensive, Michael confirmed. Marcus has been systematically poisoning you 3 times per week for 4 months, using methods that would have caused fatal heart failure within another month of continued exposure. Another month of continued exposure. Marcus had been 2 weeks away from succeeding in his murder plot when routine blood work had detected his systematic poisoning and initiated the medical intervention that had saved my life. But the evidence Michael had compiled would allow me to respond to Marcus's attempted murder through methods that extended far beyond criminal prosecution to include comprehensive destruction of his financial prospects, social relationships, and reputation within our community. Michael, I want you to prepare complete documentation packages for law enforcement, civil litigation, and family notification, I said. Marcus is going to face consequences through every possible legal and social channel. What's your timeline for exposing Marcus's crimes? Michael asked. I want to confront Marcus during his next visit to my house, I replied. I want him to understand that his poisoning has been detected and documented before law enforcement becomes involved. Confronting Marcus directly would provide him with an opportunity to confess his crimes and explain his motivations, but more importantly, it would allow me to see his reaction to discovery and determine whether he felt genuine remorse or only regret about being caught. That Thursday, Marcus arrived for his regular visit carrying groceries and displaying the same concerned attention to my welfare that had characterized his behavior since he'd begun systematically poisoning me 4 months earlier. "Dad, how are you feeling today?" Marcus asked as he unpacked items for the dinner he'd planned to prepare, using ingredients he'd carefully selected to complement the digitalis compounds he'd been administering through my food and beverages. "Marcus, I'm feeling much better since Dr. Reynolds adjusted my treatment plan," I said, watching his reaction to information that suggested medical intervention might be affecting his poisoning schedule. "Treatment plan? Dad, you didn't tell me you were having health problems," Marcus replied, his voice carrying concern that was either genuine worry about my welfare or anxiety about complications that might interfere with his murder timeline. "I've been having some cardiac symptoms that required blood work and medication adjustments," I explained, studying Marcus's expression for signs of panic or guilt about medical discoveries that might expose his systematic poisoning. Marcus maintained his composure, but I detected subtle changes in his demeanor that suggested he was calculating whether routine medical monitoring might have detected abnormal blood chemistry that could complicate his plans. "Dad, what kind of cardiac symptoms? Should I be worried about you?" Marcus asked. The question was perfectly calibrated to sound like filial concern while actually gathering intelligence about whether his poisoning had been detected by medical professionals who might report suspicious findings to law enforcement. "Marcus, I think it's time we discussed exactly what kind of health problems I've been experiencing," I said, reaching for the folder containing Michael Torres's investigation report and the surveillance footage that would destroy Marcus's assumptions about undetected criminal activity. "And more importantly, I think it's time we discussed what you've been doing to cause those health problems," I continued. Marcus's face went completely pale as he realized that his systematic poisoning had been discovered and that his intended victim was prepared to confront him with evidence that would end his freedom and destroy his life permanently. Some conversations about family betrayal can only be conducted between people who understand that attempted murder requires consequences that match the scope of the crime and the depth of the betrayal. Marcus was about to learn that surviving attempted murder provides unique authority for teaching lessons about character, loyalty, and the true cost of using family relationships as cover for systematic criminal activity designed to benefit from other people's deaths. Marcus stared at the folder in my hands with the expression of someone who'd been confident about his criminal activities remaining undetected, but was beginning to understand that his intended victim had been more observant than he'd anticipated. "Dad, I don't understand what you're talking about," Marcus said, attempting to maintain his facade of concerned son while calculating whether he could still control the narrative about his recent attention to my health and welfare. I opened the folder and removed the first piece of evidence that would destroy Marcus's ability to deny his systematic attempts to murder me. The blood test results showing elevated digitalis levels that couldn't be explained through any legitimate medical treatment I'd been receiving. "Marcus, Dr. Reynolds found digitalis compounds in my bloodstream at levels that indicate regular administration over several months," I said, watching his face for signs of recognition or panic about the medical discovery that had exposed his poisoning. Marcus's attempt at confused innocence was masterful, but ultimately unconvincing to someone who'd spent 40 years evaluating business partners and detecting deception in high-stakes negotiations. "Dad, what's digitalis? Is that something in your heart medication?" Marcus asked, as if he hadn't spent 6 months researching digitalis poisoning and its applications for causing apparently natural death in elderly victims. "Marcus, digitalis is a compound found in foxglove plants," I replied, pulling out photographs of the foxglove garden Michael Torres had documented in Marcus's backyard. "Plants that you've been growing and harvesting since early spring." The photographs hit Marcus like physical evidence of premeditation that he couldn't explain through coincidence or innocent gardening interests. His carefully maintained expression of confusion began to crack as he processed that his activities had been under professional surveillance. "Dad, who took these pictures? Have you been spying on me?" Marcus asked, his tone shifting from confusion to indignation about privacy violations that were irrelevant compared to his systematic attempts to commit murder. I hired a private investigator to document your recent activities after medical tests revealed that someone had been poisoning me, I explained. The investigation confirmed that you've been systematically administering digitalist compounds through my food and beverages. I showed Marcus the surveillance footage from my kitchen, clear video evidence of him using an eyedropper to add liquid concentrates to the coffee he'd been bringing me 3 times per week for 4 months. Marcus watched himself committing attempted murder in high-definition video that would be admissible in criminal court and devastating in civil litigation, designed to recover damages for elder abuse and attempted homicide. "Dad, that's not what it looks like," Marcus said weakly, though the video evidence was unambiguous about his deliberate administration of compounds that would have caused fatal heart failure if continued for another month. "Marcus, what exactly does it look like?" I asked. "Because it looks like you've been trying to kill me to accelerate your inheritance and pay off the $80,000 you owe to gambling creditors." The mention of his gambling debts caused Marcus's composure to collapse completely. He realized that my investigation had been comprehensive enough to uncover not only his poisoning methods, but also his financial motivations and timeline pressures from violent creditors. "Dad, I can explain everything," Marcus said, abandoning his denials in favor of explanations that might minimize his criminal culpability while acknowledging the systematic nature of his attempts to cause my death. "Please do explain everything," I replied, settling back in my chair to hear how Marcus would justify 4 months of systematic poisoning designed to murder his father for inheritance money that would resolve gambling debts he'd accumulated through years of irresponsible financial behavior. Marcus's confession was pathetic and revealing in equal measure. He admitted to researching digitalis poisoning, growing foxglove plants, and calculating dosages that would cause gradual heart failure while avoiding immediate symptoms that might prompt medical investigation. "Dad, I never wanted to hurt you," Marcus said, delivering the kind of contradiction that characterizes people who commit systematic crimes while maintaining emotional distance from their victims. "I just needed the inheritance to pay off debts that would get me killed if I couldn't come up with the money." Never wanted to hurt me while systematically poisoning me for 4 months. Marcus was attempting to distinguish between his intentions and his actions, as if attempted murder became less criminal when motivated by financial desperation rather than personal malice. "Marcus, your gambling creditors threatened violence if you couldn't pay them, so you decided to murder me to access inheritance money early," I summarized. "How is that not wanting to hurt me?" "I thought you would just go peacefully," Marcus replied. "The research said digitalis poisoning would appear like natural heart failure. You wouldn't have suffered." Marcus had researched methods for murdering me painlessly while maintaining plausible deniability about the cause of death. His consideration for my suffering was touching, except that it was part of systematic planning to kill me for money he hadn't earned through any legitimate means. "Marcus, did you consider asking me for help with your gambling debts instead of trying to murder me?" I asked. "Dad, you would have lectured me about responsibility and made me get counseling or something," Marcus said. "I needed the money immediately, and the inheritance was going to be mine eventually anyway." The inheritance was going to be his eventually anyway. Marcus had been treating my murder as accelerated access to money he considered rightfully his, rather than acknowledging that inheritance requires the death of people who might prefer to remain alive. "Marcus, what was your timeline for killing me?" I asked. "Another month," Marcus admitted. "Maybe 6 weeks at the most. The gambling guys want their money by the end of next month, and I figured that would be enough time for the digitalis to cause a heart attack that would look natural." Another month of systematic poisoning that would have caused fatal heart failure just in time to meet Marcus's debt payment deadlines. The timing was precise and calculated, demonstrating that Marcus had been planning my death as a business transaction rather than an impulsive crime motivated by temporary desperation. But Marcus's confession had provided all the evidence needed for criminal prosecution, civil litigation, and comprehensive destruction of his reputation within our family and community. His admission of premeditated attempted murder would ensure that consequences extended far beyond the gambling debts he'd been trying to resolve through my death. "Marcus, what did you expect to happen after I died?" I asked. "I figured the will would go through probate normally, and I'd inherit enough money to pay off the debts and start over," Marcus replied. "Maybe use some of the inheritance to get professional help with the gambling problem." Start over and get professional help with gambling problems, using money obtained through murdering the father who'd supported him financially throughout his adult life despite his pattern of irresponsible behavior and poor decision-making. The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus providing details about his research methods, his dosage calculations, and his consultations with criminal associates who'd advised him about avoiding detection while committing elder abuse that would appear as natural medical decline. By the end of our discussion, I had complete documentation of Marcus's premeditated attempted murder, including his confession, his timeline, and his motivations for systematic poisoning that had brought me within weeks of death. But I also had something more valuable than evidence for criminal prosecution. I had comprehensive understanding of my son's character and the depth of his willingness to betray family relationships for personal financial gain. That understanding would guide my response to Marcus's attempted murder, ensuring that consequences extended far beyond criminal penalties to include systematic destruction of every aspect of his life that had made murdering me seem like a reasonable solution to his financial problems. Marcus had spent months planning my death with methodical precision. My response would demonstrate the same systematic approach to teaching him about consequences that would follow him for the rest of his life, regardless of how completely he recovered from gambling addiction or how genuinely he claimed to regret attempted murder. Some lessons about family loyalty and criminal behavior can only be taught by people who survive systematic betrayal and choose to respond with comprehensive consequences that match the scope of the crimes committed against them. Marcus was about to discover whether I preferred to handle his attempted murder through law enforcement channels alone, or whether I required more thorough methods for ensuring that people who try to kill family members face consequences that extend into every aspect of their existence. Marcus's confession provided me with everything I needed for criminal prosecution, but criminal courts would only address the legal aspects of attempted murder while leaving the deeper issues of family betrayal and financial irresponsibility unresolved. My response would require a more comprehensive approach that addressed every factor that had made murdering me seem like a reasonable solution to Marcus's gambling problems. The first step was ensuring that Marcus's immediate financial crisis would be resolved in ways that demonstrated the futility of his murder attempt while creating long-term consequences for his criminal behavior. I contacted Vincent DeLuca, who managed the illegal gambling operation that had been pressuring Marcus for payment. Vincent and I had worked together on legitimate business ventures before his transition into less regulated financial services, and he understood the difference between collecting debts and teaching expensive lessons about character. "Frank, I heard your son has been having some difficulties with payment schedules," Vincent said when I called to discuss Marcus's debt situation. "$80,000 is significant money, but not worth creating family problems over." "Vincent, Marcus's debt problems are about to become significantly more complicated," I explained. "My son has been systematically poisoning me for 4 months, trying to accelerate his inheritance to pay off what he owes you." The silence on Vincent's end lasted long enough for him to process that Marcus's debt resolution strategy had involved attempted murder of a family member who'd been supporting him financially throughout his adult life. "Frank, that's a level of disrespect that goes beyond gambling problems," Vincent said finally. "A man who would kill his father for money isn't someone we want to do business with, regardless of how much he owes us." "I'm prepared to settle Marcus's debt in full, plus interest, in exchange for your cooperation with certain educational measures," I said. "Marcus needs to understand consequences that extend beyond criminal prosecution." Vincent agreed to accept full payment of Marcus's gambling debt while implementing collection procedures that would demonstrate to Marcus exactly how close he'd come to violence from people who don't negotiate payment extensions or accept family emergency excuses. The second phase of my strategy involved Marcus's employment prospects and professional reputation. Marcus worked as a sales representative for a medical equipment company, a position that required credibility and trustworthiness when dealing with healthcare facilities and their purchasing decisions. I contacted Dr. Patricia Reynolds and asked her to document Marcus's attempted murder in medical records that would be available to law enforcement, insurance companies, and professional licensing boards that evaluate character and integrity in healthcare-related employment. "Frank, attempted murder of a family member for financial gain raises serious questions about Marcus's suitability for positions that require handling medical equipment or interacting with vulnerable patients," Dr. Reynolds said when I explained Marcus's systematic poisoning and his confession. Medical equipment sales positions require background checks and character verification that would exclude people with attempted murder charges from working in healthcare environments. Marcus's career prospects would be permanently damaged by criminal prosecution that revealed his willingness to poison elderly family members for inheritance money. But the most important aspect of my strategy involved Marcus's social relationships and community reputation. Our family had been prominent in local business and charitable activities for decades, and Marcus's attempted murder would need to be disclosed to people who'd known him since childhood. I prepared comprehensive documentation packages that included Michael Torres's investigation report, the surveillance footage of Marcus poisoning my coffee, and Marcus's detailed confession about his murder timeline and financial motivations. These packages would be distributed to family members, business associates, and community leaders who deserved to know that Marcus had been capable of systematic attempted murder disguised as filial concern for his aging father's welfare. The third day after Marcus's confession, I implemented the first phase of consequences that would demonstrate the futility of his murder attempt while beginning his education about betrayal, loyalty, and the true cost of using family relationships as cover for criminal activity. Vincent DeLuca visited Marcus at his apartment to inform him that his gambling debt had been paid in full by his intended murder victim, but that future credit would not be available from any gambling operation that valued reputation and community relationships. "Marcus, your father paid your debt," Vincent explained during the visit that Marcus had assumed would involve violence or extended payment negotiations, but he also told us about your creative approach to debt resolution. Marcus's relief at having his immediate financial crisis resolved was short-lived, as he understood that his systematic poisoning had been exposed to the same criminal associates who'd been pressuring him for payment. "Marcus, we don't do business with people who poison family members," Vincent continued. "Your father earned respect through 40 years of honest business practices. You lost that respect by trying to murder him for inheritance money." The conversation lasted 30 minutes, during which Vincent explained that Marcus's reputation in gambling circles had been permanently damaged by revelations about attempted murder that demonstrated character deficits incompatible with the honor codes that govern even illegal financial activities. That same afternoon, Marcus received notification from his employer that he was being terminated immediately following disclosure of criminal charges related to elder abuse and attempted murder of a family member. "Mr. Henderson, attempted murder charges are incompatible with employment in medical equipment sales," Marcus's supervisor explained during the phone call that ended his career in healthcare-related industries. "Our insurance policies and professional licensing requirements exclude employees who've been charged with violent crimes against vulnerable populations." Marcus's termination was effective immediately, with no severance package or positive employment references that might assist his transition to other career opportunities. His professional reputation had been destroyed as completely as his financial crisis had been resolved. But Marcus's education about consequences was just beginning. Over the next week, he would discover how thoroughly his attempted murder had been documented and how comprehensively his life would be affected by systematic betrayal of family relationships for gambling money he'd been unable to earn through legitimate means. The evening after Marcus lost his job, I visited his apartment to discuss the next phases of consequences that would follow him regardless of criminal prosecution outcomes or his claims about remorse for attempted murder. "Dad, thank you for paying off my debts," Marcus said when he answered the door, his voice carrying gratitude mixed with anxiety about what additional consequences might follow his confession to systematic poisoning. "Marcus, I paid your debts to demonstrate that murdering me was never necessary for resolving your financial problems," I replied. "But paying your debts doesn't address the fact that you spent 4 months trying to kill me." Marcus's apartment showed signs of stress and disruption consistent with someone whose life had been fundamentally altered by exposure of criminal activity and loss of employment prospects. "Dad, I know I made terrible mistakes," Marcus said, "but I'm ready to get help for the gambling problem and make things right between us." Ready to get help and make things right. Marcus was offering the kind of rehabilitation promises that people make when they're facing consequences for behavior they'd assumed would remain undetected and unpunished. "Marcus, what kind of help do you think would address attempted murder motivated by gambling debts?" I asked. "Gambling addiction counseling, maybe some therapy to understand why I made such bad decisions," Marcus replied, as if systematic poisoning could be explained through addiction issues rather than fundamental character deficits that had made murdering family members seem reasonable. Marcus, addiction doesn't explain 4 months of systematic planning to poison your father, I said. Addiction doesn't explain researching murder methods or calculating dosages that would cause apparently natural death. Marcus's attempts to frame his attempted murder as addiction-related poor judgment were unconvincing to someone who'd survived systematic betrayal and understood the difference between impulsive bad decisions and methodical criminal planning designed to benefit from other people's deaths. But Marcus's educational process would continue over the following months as he discovered how completely his life would be affected by consequences that extended far beyond immediate financial and employment problems. Some lessons about family loyalty and criminal behavior can only be taught through systematic consequences that demonstrate the permanent cost of betraying people who'd supported and loved you throughout your adult life. Marcus was about to learn that surviving attempted murder provides unique authority for determining how thoroughly someone's life should be affected by their willingness to commit systematic crimes against family members for gambling money they'd been unable to earn through honest work. The criminal proceedings against Marcus began 2 weeks after his confession, when Detective Williams from the Elder Abuse Unit filed formal charges that included attempted murder, elder abuse, and criminal conspiracy based on evidence that Marcus had been working with experienced criminals to plan my systematic poisoning. "Mr. Henderson, your son is facing 15 to 20 years in state prison if convicted on all charges," Detective Williams explained during the pretrial conference. Attempted murder of a family member for financial gain carries enhanced penalties under elder abuse statutes. 15 to 20 years in state prison. The sentence would ensure that Marcus faced consequences that extended far beyond the gambling debts he'd been trying to resolve through my death. But criminal prosecution was only one aspect of the comprehensive consequences I'd designed to address Marcus's betrayal of family relationships and his systematic planning to murder me for inheritance money. The civil litigation I'd initiated against Marcus sought recovery of all financial support I'd provided him over the past decade, plus damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive penalties that would ensure his financial ruin regardless of his criminal sentence. "Frank, we're seeking recovery of approximately $300,000 in financial support you've provided Marcus since he reached adulthood," my attorney explained, plus damages for attempted murder that could reach 7 figures depending on jury sentiment about elder abuse cases. $300,000 in financial support. Marcus had been systematically poisoning the father who'd been supporting him financially while he'd been accumulating gambling debts and avoiding responsibility for career development or mature decision-making. The comprehensive financial accounting included college tuition payments, business loan guarantees, rent subsidies, car purchases, and emergency financial assistance that had totaled more than Marcus would inherit from my estate, even if he'd succeeded in murdering me. But the most devastating aspect of Marcus's consequences involved his social relationships and community reputation. I distributed documentation packages about his attempted murder to everyone who'd known our family during the decades when I'd been building Henderson Industries and supporting community charitable activities. The packages included Marcus's confession, the surveillance footage of him poisoning my coffee, and expert testimony about digitalis poisoning that would have caused fatal heart failure if continued for another month. Marcus's extended family, childhood friends, former classmates, and professional associates received comprehensive documentation that Marcus had been systematically trying to murder his father for inheritance money that would resolve gambling debts he'd accumulated through years of irresponsible financial behavior. The social consequences were swift and permanent. Marcus's relationships with cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends were severed completely as people understood that he'd been capable of systematic attempted murder disguised as concern for his aging father's welfare. "Marcus, we can't have any contact with someone who tried to poison their father for money," his cousin Jennifer explained during the phone call that ended their lifelong friendship. "What you did goes beyond gambling problems or financial desperation." Former colleagues from Marcus's medical equipment sales position spread information about his attempted murder throughout their professional networks, ensuring that healthcare industry employers would be aware of his criminal background when evaluating future job applications. "Marcus Henderson tried to kill his father for inheritance money" became the summary that followed Marcus throughout employment searches and social interactions with people who'd known him before his arrest for systematic elder abuse. But Marcus's education about consequences reached its peak during the family gathering. I'd organized 6 months after his confession, where relatives and friends assembled to discuss how his attempted murder had affected their understanding of trust, loyalty, and family relationships. Marcus was not invited to attend the gathering, but he was discussed extensively as an example of how gambling addiction and financial desperation could corrupt someone's character to the point where murdering family members seemed like reasonable problem solving. "Frank, we had no idea Marcus was capable of something like this," said my brother Robert, who'd known Marcus since birth and had considered him a nephew worthy of trust and affection. "He seemed like a normal person with some gambling issues, not someone who would poison family members." Normal person with gambling issues. Marcus's ability to maintain relationships while systematically planning attempted murder had demonstrated sophisticated deception skills that made everyone question their ability to recognize dangerous character deficits in people they'd known for decades. "The most disturbing aspect is how long Marcus was planning Frank's death," added my sister Margaret. 4 months of systematic poisoning while pretending to care about his father's health and welfare. The family discussion continued for hours, with relatives sharing their shock at discovering Marcus's criminal capabilities and their relief that routine medical monitoring had detected his systematic poisoning before it could achieve its intended result. But the gathering also served as Marcus's formal exclusion from family relationships that had provided emotional support and social connection throughout his life. The unanimous decision was that Marcus's attempted murder disqualified him from future family events, financial assistance, or personal relationships with people who valued loyalty and integrity. A year after Marcus's confession, he was sentenced to 12 years in state prison plus 7 years of supervised probation, contingent on full restitution of damages through civil litigation that would consume any assets he managed to accumulate after his release. "Mr. Henderson, you systematically planned to murder your father for inheritance money," Judge Patricia Valdez said during the sentencing hearing. "Your crime represents betrayal of the most fundamental family bonds and demonstrates character deficits that require extensive incarceration and supervision." 12 years in state prison. Marcus would serve his sentence while his former life disappeared completely, replaced by consequences that would follow him permanently, regardless of how much he claimed to have learned about character and family loyalty. The restitution judgment ensured that Marcus would spend decades after his release working to repay damages he'd caused through systematic attempted murder that had consumed my retirement years and destroyed trust that had taken decades to build. But the most profound consequence of Marcus's attempted murder was the transformation of his crime into educational resources that would prevent similar elder abuse in other families facing gambling addiction and financial manipulation. I established the Henderson Foundation for Elder Protection, using money recovered through civil litigation against Marcus to fund programs that taught families to recognize systematic poisoning and financial exploitation before they escalated to attempted murder. "Mr. Henderson, your experience has helped us develop early detection programs that have prevented dozens of elder abuse cases in our first year of operation," the Foundation director reported during our initial annual meeting. The Foundation served over 200 families, providing medical screening, legal consultation, and family counseling that helped people distinguish between legitimate concern for elderly relatives and systematic manipulation designed to accelerate inheritance timelines. Marcus's attempt to murder me for gambling money had been converted into resources that protected other families from similar betrayal while providing education about the warning signs of financial desperation that could escalate to violence against vulnerable family members. 2 years after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in state prison, written as part of a court-mandated victim reconciliation program that required him to acknowledge his crimes and attempt to make amends with people he'd systematically betrayed. "Dad," Marcus wrote, "I know I can't undo what I did to you and our family, but I want you to know that prison has taught me something important about the difference between needing money and killing family members to get it." Marcus explained that addiction counseling had helped him understand how gambling desperation had justified increasingly criminal behavior, but that desperation didn't excuse systematic planning to murder family members or the elaborate deception required to administer fatal doses of digitalis while maintaining his facade of concerned son. "I spent months researching how to kill you while making it look natural," Marcus wrote. "That wasn't addiction talking, that was calculated murder planned by someone who'd lost any sense of right and wrong." The acknowledgement was appropriate but insufficient for someone who'd been within weeks of succeeding in systematic murder, disguised as natural medical decline in an elderly parent. Some crimes reveal character deficits too profound for rehabilitation through standard counseling or incarceration. Some betrayals destroy relationships permanently, regardless of how much someone claims to have learned about loyalty and family bonds. Marcus had learned that attempted murder carries consequences that extend far beyond criminal penalties, to include systematic destruction of every relationship and opportunity that had made killing family members seem like acceptable problem-solving. But learning about consequences is different from developing the character that would have prevented attempted murder in the first place, and I remained convinced that Marcus's primary regret was being caught rather than genuine remorse for systematic betrayal of family trust. 5 years after Marcus's sentencing for attempted murder, I received notification that he was being considered for early parole based on good behavior and completion of addiction treatment programs designed to address the gambling problems that had motivated his systematic poisoning of family members. The parole hearing provided an opportunity to address whether Marcus had genuinely changed his character or simply learned to present himself more favorably to people who controlled his freedom and future opportunities. I testified at the hearing with documentation of Marcus's systematic planning, his elaborate deception, and his confession that revealed the depth of his willingness to betray family relationships for gambling money he'd been unable to earn through legitimate work. Marcus Henderson spent months researching methods for murdering his father while maintaining the appearance of natural death, I told the parole board. His crime wasn't impulsive addiction-related behavior. It was calculated murder planned by someone who viewed family relationships as resources to be exploited when convenient. The parole board reviewed evidence that Marcus had been 2 weeks away from succeeding in his murder plot when medical intervention had detected his systematic digitalis poisoning and initiated the investigation that had exposed his criminal activity. Mr. Henderson's son demonstrated sophisticated criminal planning that extended over months and included consultation with experienced criminals about methods for avoiding detection while committing elder abuse, the prosecutor added. Marcus appeared at the hearing wearing prison uniforms and displaying what appeared to be genuine remorse for crimes that had destroyed his family relationships and professional prospects permanently. "I understand that what I did was unforgivable," Marcus said when given opportunity to address his victims and the parole board. "I used my father's love and trust as weapons against him, and I planned to kill him for money that I could have earned through honest work if I'd had any integrity." The admission was more comprehensive than his original confession, acknowledging not only his criminal actions, but also his exploitation of family relationships and his character deficits that had made systematic murder seem reasonable. "I can't ask for forgiveness because there's no adequate apology for trying to poison your father for inheritance money," Marcus continued, "but I want the parole board to know that prison has taught me the true cost of my choices, not just for me but for everyone who trusted me." The parole board denied Marcus's application for early release, determining that attempted murder of family members for financial gain required completion of his full sentence, regardless of his apparent rehabilitation or addiction treatment success. Mr. Henderson planned and executed systematic attempted murder over a period of months, the parole board chair explained. This level of premeditation and family betrayal requires consequences that reflect the severity of crimes that could have succeeded if not for accidental medical detection. Marcus would serve his complete 12-year sentence, ensuring that consequences for attempted murder extended over a period longer than the gambling addiction that had motivated his systematic poisoning of family members. But Marcus's incarceration was only one aspect of consequences that would follow him permanently after his eventual release from prison. His criminal record would prevent employment in healthcare, finance, education, or any other industry that required background checks and character verification. The civil litigation judgment ensured that Marcus would spend decades after his release repaying damages through wage garnishment that would consume significant portions of any income he managed to earn through the limited employment opportunities available to convicted attempted murderers. Most importantly, Marcus's social relationships had been permanently severed by comprehensive disclosure of his systematic betrayal to family members, friends, and community associates who'd learned that he'd been capable of elaborate criminal deception disguised as filial concern. 3 years after the parole hearing, I celebrated my 75th birthday, surrounded by family members and friends who understood the difference between supporting people through difficult times and enabling criminal behavior that exploited trust for personal gain. The celebration took place in the same house where Marcus had been systematically poisoning my coffee while researching methods for accelerating my death to resolve his gambling debts through inheritance money he'd assumed was rightfully his. But the house had been transformed from a crime scene into a gathering place for people who valued loyalty, integrity, and the kind of family relationships that strengthen rather than exploit the bonds between people who choose to love and support each other. The Henderson Foundation for Elder Protection had grown into a comprehensive program serving over 800 families dealing with financial manipulation, systematic abuse, and criminal exploitation disguised as family concern for elderly relatives' welfare. Mr. Henderson, your willingness to transform personal trauma into community education has prevented dozens of elder abuse cases that might have escalated to attempted murder, the Foundation director reported during our annual meeting. The Foundation provided medical screening, legal consultation, family counseling, and law enforcement training that helped communities recognize and prevent systematic poisoning, financial exploitation, and other crimes that targeted elderly people through their relationships with family members who'd gained their trust. Marcus's attempt to murder me for gambling money had been converted into resources that protected other families while providing education about the warning signs of financial desperation that could escalate to violence against people who'd spent lifetimes building wealth and relationships that others viewed as opportunities for exploitation. 4 years after his denied parole application, Marcus sent his final letter from state prison, acknowledging that his crimes had consequences that would follow him permanently, regardless of how completely he claimed to have reformed his character through addiction treatment and counseling. Dad, I understand that some mistakes can't be fixed through apologies or good behavior, Marcus wrote. I destroyed our family relationship permanently by trying to kill you, and I accept that these consequences will follow me for the rest of my life. Marcus explained that prison had taught him to distinguish between feeling sorry for himself about punishment and understanding the lasting damage he'd caused to people who'd loved and supported him throughout his adult life. I can't ask for forgiveness because attempted murder isn't forgivable, Marcus continued, but I want you to know that I understand why you had to expose my crimes and ensure that consequences matched what I tried to do to you and our family. The letter concluded with acknowledgement that Marcus's relationship with me had been permanently severed by systematic betrayal that had revealed character deficits too profound for rehabilitation through standard counseling or expressions of remorse delivered from prison cells. Some crimes destroy relationships permanently, regardless of how much someone claims to have learned about loyalty, character, and the true cost of using family love as justification for systematic criminal activity designed to benefit from other people's deaths. Marcus had learned that attempted murder of family members carries consequences that extend far beyond criminal penalties to include comprehensive destruction of every relationship and opportunity that had been built through decades of trust and mutual support. But learning about consequences through punishment is different from developing the character that would have prevented attempted murder in the first place. And Marcus's education would continue for the rest of his life regardless of how much he claimed to understand about the difference between needing money and killing family members to obtain it. 8 years after Marcus's attempted murder, I remain healthy, active, and surrounded by people who understand that true family relationships are built on trust, loyalty, and genuine concern for each other's welfare rather than calculations about inheritance timelines and financial opportunities. The digitalis poisoning that nearly killed me had been converted into comprehensive education about elder protection, family loyalty, and the importance of recognizing criminal manipulation before it escalates to systematic attempted murder disguised as filial concern. I hope this story touched you, especially those protecting themselves and elderly family members from financial exploitation and systematic abuse that could escalate to violence. If this story moved you, please support our channel with a like and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal, elder protection, and the courage to survive attempted murder while teaching comprehensive lessons about consequences. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, or let us know where you're listening from around the world. These stories about family trust, criminal betrayal, and protecting vulnerable people from exploitation connect communities across all cultures. Thank you for joining this journey through attempted murder, family destruction, and the wisdom that comes from understanding the difference between supporting people through difficult times and enabling criminal behavior that exploits love for personal gain. Until next time, remember, the most valuable lesson isn't about money or inheritance, but about recognizing when family concern becomes criminal manipulation, and having the strength to ensure that people who try to murder family members face consequences that match the scope of their betrayal.